Alright, we're back here at Lantern Insights again, just continuing to test this all tutors list from the last video, and I'm really happy with it so far, but obviously needs like a lot of testing. Probably you'll see over the next week, a lot of testing with it. Still sorting out sideboard slots right now, so mainly just running it through like tournament practice, trying to get like meta decks and just experiencing different like sideboard plans. And then the plan is to run it through a couple leagues this weekend once I have the sideboard a bit more fleshed out. Here in this game, we open up a pretty solid hand. Like we got the full lock. Yes, it's just one land, but we're going to be able to go turn one Bauble Shredder, which will hopefully find us the second land. Sometimes if I didn't have Bauble, I would lead on Lantern and then Shredder. But here, because I have the Bauble, I just am going to use it to find the second land, which we do see on top. And here, so you're going to duress first. It's worse against, like, I don't know, Mana Tithe, Stubborn Denial, things like that. Not playing the land, but if they have like Force or something here, I don't know, I just don't play the land. And they play Consider, so the Misty into Watery Grave, definitely looking like Dimir control kind of, and we get to see their hand, and we do see is likely some Dimir. Street Wraith is looking like Shadow, and like Drown in the Lock, Street Wraith, either like some sort of Dimir Shadow list. Obviously, we take the dress down here. Important to note, with double Street Wraith, it is going to be a much harder to lock them than it would be normally. So that instant speed draw on the Wraith is actually like something that we are going to have to kind of force out, or just get like enough lock pieces or a Pithing Needle in play before it becomes relevant. So here, unfortunately, they are able to force a counterspell into their hand. Decks like this, shadow type shadow decks, are usually very hard to deal with a resolved bridge. So if we were able to play bridge, it would be much better for us. And we do see the red mana here, which is important. Murktide, again, here is also kind of not great for us. Sorry, they played Street Wraith and the Strand. So we do know they have one counterspell in hand. One thing I sometimes do is just use the chat just to write down cards that they draw but don't show up as revealed. That is one thing about MTGO that would definitely prefer if you see a card on the top of their deck goes into their hand if it came up in revealed cards. But as far as I know, that doesn't happen in any way. So just kind of have to keep track of them down here. And here they hold up Bowmasters. I think it was probably correct for them to try to cycle into that Murktide, but then I guess I get the bridge down. So that is kind of why you use Shredder there to get rid of the Murktide instead of like waiting for their upkeep, as I sometimes would, because it's easier for them to force things through at their end step. They're going to play out their Bowmasters here, and Bowmasters is not really a threat for Lantern. Like we don't draw extra cards mostly. This Bauble I probably just won't end up cracking. And the clock of just the 2/2s is very slow. So we're not really worried too much about it. And then from here we're just going to leverage Urza Saga power, where we're just going to make a lot of artifacts and some pretty big constructs. Fortunately, being a shadow type deck, they've done a lot of damage to themselves. So it is kind of an important skill, I think, with this deck, is when to flip from locking control ensnaring bridge to I gotta get aggro with constructs, and then just keeping them off cards that stop the constructs. And we'll see here we're actually able to make very large constructs, and I don't use Shredder on Preordain here. Yes, Preordain is like a very good card in the matchup, but they still have the Street Wraith in hand, so it's kind of hard to keep them off anything at this point. So I think I'd rather try to fight over something else down the line. And then with Preordain here, they find a Death Shadow, which is going to be pretty. They're going to be able to make it large, but we can actually make constructs that are bigger than the Shadow. So we actually get in a position here where they make very large shadow, but we make very large constructs. And the goal kind of here is to have hold the constructs back on defense until, with this second Saga, we're able to play 4 lethal attackers, which is going to be pretty soon. And importantly here with the double Codex Shredder, it means we are able to fight over the Street Wraith. So if we mill something, they Street Wraith, we can mill it again. And yeah, like I said, the Death Shadow can't attack. We have constructs that are bigger than it, Bowmasters and things, those can't attack either. And here we do elect to mill the Thoughtseize. We don't use the second Codex Shredder because we want to have 2 up at all times. So they do let us mill the Drown in the Loch, just one less removal spell. And then here they have a second Street Wraith, which isn't great, but not a ton we can do. They do draw a second Counterspell, but fortunately in this game the Counterspells aren't going to be too relevant. I'm going to kind of pass through from here, but with just Street Wraiths, like they can play a Murktide, which is big, but they're at 4, so we're able to make construct. When we swing with 3 creatures here, they have to chump with Bowmasters, Orc Army, and Bowmasters in order to not die, because all of our constructs are lethal. And we're then able to use our construct to block the Death Shadow, so only the Murktide gets through, and because all of our constructs survive, we'll be able to kill them on the next turn. And we do keep them off Preordain Odawara, Stubborn Denial, we can let them have. Not a big deal here. So we do, our 10/10 constructs get their 40 power on the battlefield from Lantern. This game, we didn't see too much of the new package. We kind of drew Profane Tutor right at the end when it wasn't really relevant, but we'll see some more of it in the next 2 games. So I don't totally have my sideboard plan fleshed out for Shadow, but traditionally it's a matchup that doesn't require too much sideboarding. Usually just something like Welding Jar and then cutting like Grafdigger's Cage or something like that has been the plan for it. Here we elect to take a mulligan. As Thoughtseize, we don't want to deal ourselves that much damage. We don't have a bridge, which is the most important card in this matchup, and like our hand really doesn't do too much past the Thoughtseize, and they do usually play a lot of threats. This hand here is much better. Whir of Invention, importantly being at instant speed, is very, very relevant against counterspell decks, so hopefully we're able to leverage that. And we draw a Profane Tutor here, just more tutors, kind of overloading with with options. And so they're going to play double fetch, not cracking either of them. And we're going to duress here just to see what they're working with, as it's likely they're holding up some form of counter magic. You could suspend the Profane Tutor here, but I want to get this Lantern down and be able to find a 3rd land, because I think this hand has a lot of power if we're able to get to those later turns with all of our lands. And as this is a bit slower, we'll still be able to suspend the Profane Tutor, as they don't have like an early Ragavan or something like that as a threat. In their hand, we do see double Counterspells, Engineered Explosives, and I elect to take the EE and think we just have to fight our way through the Counterspells. It's kind of very hard with this hand. Like you could take Murktide, or you couldn't with the Duress, but if this was Thoughtseize, like they do have a threat that's going to come down soon. Street Wraith, free draw through the lock. Double Counterspell, so if I take Drown in the Loch, they'll use Counterspell on it, and then they're left with EE in hand, and I'm kind of waiting like multiple turns to deal with that. With kind of 4 cards they have to counter here, and they have 2 Counterspells and a Thoughtseize. We know that like one of them's going to get through, which should put us in an alright spot, especially if they use the Counterspell on Lantern. Provided we find the 3rd land, we should be able to get a bridge down through one of our 3 ways of getting bridge here. And so they do end up counterspelling this, or Drown in the Loch, sorry, with it. Yeah, so obviously here they're going to deal some damage to themselves. Thoughtseize, they take the Profane Tutor, kind of hoping to keep us on 2 lands. I guess, if we don't draw land here, Profane Tutor is what we're suspending. Fortunately, we do find the land. Unfortunately, they found a Stubborn Denial, which it's too bad. We get our bridge countered, and we know they have another counterspell in hand, so it is going to be a bit difficult to navigate through this last counterspell. And they run the Murktide out. Importantly, if we want to cast Whir, we're functionally on a 3-turn clock. They play Alpine Moon on Urza Saga. Obviously, it won't be great if we draw it, but it's not going to be a huge part of this game at any rate. And here, I like to cast the Whir for one. Obviously, you could hold it for a bit later, but I do want the Lantern to hopefully. I think our most likely way of winning this game is simply going Whir and then going discard spell into bridge, as we got to get rid of the counterspell. And so we could hold it, but then we're kind of relying on drawing lands and that sort of thing, and I don't think that puts us in a good position. Unfortunately, here it is a land on top, which is going to mean we have to mill ourselves rather aggressively. Sorry, I skipped through that a bit quickly. I sacked the Lantern because with Bowmasters in hand, they're going to hit us down to 11 and put 8 power on the board. Still a turn 2 clock, but we have to go exactly discard spell into Ensnaring Bridge or Ensnaring Bridge into Ensnaring Bridge, and when we milled, that wasn't on top. So unfortunately, we draw land here. Nothing with their counterspell in hand. There's nothing we can do here. Tough game, but Shadow, they do have a lot of that interaction and that counter magic there. On the play for game 3 is a big deal. I think it really, in these counterspell matchups, it is very impactful, the play draw difference. And again, really like this hand here. One thing that I found with this, when you're playing all the tutors, is that your top decks are really good. So in some variants, a lot of your top decks are kind of dead in a lot of situations, or they're very redundant. But in this version, like, most of your top decks are almost always live. Obviously, this hand is very strong anyway, so we don't have to rely on top decks as much as we sometimes do. But in this deck specifically, I found them to be quite good. We draw a Portable Hole here. This is one card that I've really been liking with Whir. I think it's strong both to play before Whir and then just be an artifact that sits out and taps. Essentially just taps for mana at that point when you're casting Whir. And it's also very good to find it off Whir, where sometimes I had a game against Burn where I was able to use Whir to get the Portable Hole to answer their 2-mana enchantment that stops life gain and pings for 1 a turn. I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head, but you know what I mean. That removing something from Burn at instant speed off the Whir was very relevant. Now here we do see that their threats are definitely slower this game, so it's kind of a less aggressive build of Shadow than many are. But double Counterspell here, again, on the play, we should be able to, like with double Bridge, we can definitely force one of them through here. So we take one, and we're going to run out the Lantern. Just going to keep them off of a third one. Whir here is not great for us, as we need the third land. Also, them drawing Engineered Explosives is not good for us. We are going to mill ourselves here, importantly, as if we get a third land and then play Bridge, in order to counterspell it, they will have to crack these fetches for the explosives anyway. But here, if they do decide to hold their fetches, we don't want to have to tap our Shredder. And with the third land on top, their clock is very slow. We Thoughtseize, and they elect not to crack their fetches, which is a decision for sure. We're like they're counterspelling a Thoughtseize if not, so probably not the trade they wanted to make. But obviously they're going to leave this Engineered Explosives in on top of their library. And importantly, you want to wait until their upkeep to do it, as if you do it on their end step, and they can use their fetches more as you mill it. But it is a card that we have to mill here, and we'll let them draw Shadow of Mortality, not something we're too concerned with. And here they are just holding up Bowmasters, so we've found answers to both of their counterspells, and we have the third land. So Bowmasters, again, very slow clock, and we'll yeah, we just slam bridge here. They don't have any answers to it, and we get the game 3 against Shadow. Obviously, you know, dealing with counterspells, multiple discard is pretty strong. If we had more lands, Whir of Invention would have been able to do the same thing. But these decks, I think the matchups like this, where it's kind of counterspell heavy as their interaction, are definitely favored for us, especially on the play. So things like Shadow, Murktide are pretty favored matchups all around. Still very happy with this list. Kind of still tuning the sideboard a bit, and quite happy with it. If you want to continue to see my developments and testing with the deck, don't forget to subscribe so you see all the new versions and new play that I come out with.